Before dawn, October 1944, a heavy tropical mist blankets Mabalacat airfield in the Philippines. The night is restless, filled with distant artillery, the rumbling of American convoys, and the quiet, resigned footsteps of young men shuffled between canvas tents. Inside a makeshift briefing hut sits Vice Admiral Takijiro Onishi, the architect of what will become one of World War II's most harrowing chapters. The faces around him are tense. Fresh university graduates pressed into uniform, pilots who once dreamed of flight but now gather for reasons none dare speak aloud. The air is humid with nervous promise and the scent of burning fuel. There is only one way left, Onishi intones, to defend the homeland. He does not look up from his maps as he delivers the command that will birth the special attack units, the Kamikaze. Outside, Lieutenant Yukio Seki steels himself for the coming day. His notes to his wife betray no fear, only ritual, advice for living proudly should he fall. Ground crews fit his Zero fighter with a single, formidable 250-killing bomb. They move slowly, hands reverent, as priests bless the airframe with sake. Around them, mechanics and friends gather for a final photograph. Seki knots his white hachimaki, a rising sun band filled in with the blood of local schoolgirls, stitched for luck and conviction. In this moment, he is not a zealot, but a son and a student caught in the machinery of something larger than any pilot, any officer, any empire. At sunrise, the first wave departs, engines roaring into the haze. On the decks of U.S. escort carriers, radar officers summon battle stations. The American fleet witnesses the birth of a new threat, a Zero emerging from cloud, diving with fatal intent. At 10:53 a.m., the USS St. Tor low is struck amidships. Smoke and flame blossom, ammunition explodes, and the ship succumbs to the sea, the first vessel lost to a deliberate suicide attack. In Tokyo newspapers, the event is heralded as a divine wind, a legend reborn from the typhoons that once saved Japan from Mongol invasion. But on Philippine runways and in the shadows of Kyushu's airfields, the truth is less grand. The Kamikaze have been unleashed not as miracles, but as an act of desperate arithmetic, conversion of dwindling resources into waves of certain death. In their hearts, pilots witness the dawn of a ritual where glory is measured in smoke, and sacrifice is the only currency remaining for a fading empire. Part 2 deepens, as the machinery of faith and necessity drives young men into the arms of destiny. Part 2, rising tension. With each week, the Kamikaze mission transforms from isolated gesture to orchestrated campaign. Across Kyushu, Chiran, Kushira, and Kanoya, rows of battered Zeros line the runways, their fuselages modified for maximum explosive yield. The pilots are younger, the training abridged. In barracks, they write hurried letters, fragments of poetry, shy confessions, uncertain pride. If I do not return, do not weep. Smile for me, mother. Smile. Recruitment swells, often coercively. Behind the myth of volunteering lies the bitter reality, the threat of dishonor for families, the call for redemption through death. Some pilots sleep fitfully, haunted by the prospect that refusal means shame or worse, a doomed combat tour in a crippled fighter squadron. The morning before departure, camaraderie blooms through gestures, sock offered, flowers exchanged, a final nervous laugh. It is a camaraderie stitched together by tragedy. Ritual suffuses every flight. As sunrise paints the tarmac with gold, priests bless cockpits, officers distribute ceremonial daggers for self-defense, and photographs are snapped for propaganda, cementing the image of serene resolve. In reality, many of these young men are sick with dread. Unuki, who survived his squadron's first mission due to a mechanical defect, recalled seeing the eyes of friends as they idled on the runway, sad and distant, like deep-sea fish looking up at the blue sky above. Men suppressed their doubts for fear of shaming parents, facing not only the Americans but also the weight of generations. From October 1944 to spring 1945, 3,800 kamikaze missions are launched, sinking 34 Allied ships and killing more than 7,000 American sailors. Most attacks, however, are unsuccessful. Less than 1 in 5 ever find their target, most ending in gunfire and broken wings over dark water. Still, the missions continue, for Japan measures success not in victory but in devotion, obedience, and illusion. Commanders insist that each pilot's death will change the war's course, that their bodies will become living bombs capable of turning back the tide. The technology evolves with the struggle. Out of battered hangars crawl new machines. The MXY-7 Oka, Baka bomb to the Americans, a rocket-powered glider, and the Chiton, a human-guided torpedo. These weapons carry men into death faster and more certainly than ever before. Ground crews modify older Zeros for greater blast radius. Engineers fit extra gas tanks for longer flights and more spectacular flames. The pilots learn, above all, to surrender themselves fully. Mechanical precision becomes spiritual obligation. As the Battle of Okinawa unfolds, the Kamikaze missions reach a fever pitch. Over 1,900 attacks batter the American fleet. Destroyers endure 22 direct hits and somehow remain afloat, sheathed in fire. Survivors speak of horizons filled with diving planes, each burning with the hope or the delusion of victory bought in blood. Every strike is a prayer sent forward on the wind, a belief that the gods of Yamato still favor those willing to embrace oblivion. Night falls again and again on Kyushu's runways. Fresh waves gather, eyes hardened, hearts trembling. The machinery of death is ready. Tomorrow, more will climb into cockpits for the final embrace with fate. The world waits. The spring of 1945 was Japan's last season of illusion. The cherry blossoms fell early that year, their petals scattered across airfields drenched in fuel and blood. In Kyushu's Chiron base, the barracks echoed with subdued laughter, the kind that hides terror. On wooden tables, 20-year-olds carved farewell poems into photographs and daggers. Each line was a quiet scream turned into calligraphy. I will fly, and you must live. One of them was Second Lieutenant Roji Uehara. In his final letter to his parents, he did not speak of honor, only emptiness. A pilot of the Special Assault Unit is merely a machine. He just steers the apparatus. He is only a molecule within a magnet that sticks fast to an enemy carrier. He possesses neither personality nor emotion. The words were a confession written against an empire that had turned human souls into fuel. On May 11, 1945, he flew his Zero directly into the American carrier group off Okinawa, vanishing into a white explosion seen miles away. Another was Kiyoshi Ogawa, barely 20. On that same day, he guided his plane into USS Bunker Hill, detonating a 250-kilogram bomb that engulfed 2 decks in Inferno, killing almost 400 men. Survivors remembered his aircraft circling once, almost gently, before diving. In Japanese records, his mission lasted 23 seconds from acknowledgement to impact. His mother received nothing but 2 folded flags and an unread promise. In museums at Chiron and Kanoya today, visitors stare into photographs frozen before takeoff. Boys half smiling, one cradling a puppy, another polishing glasses he will never need again. These are not villains. These are human equations in a system that erased choice. The Imperial Command had long known the missions were ineffective, yet the optics of sacrifice were worth the cost. To die honorably was to sustain morale. To live in question was treason. In one letter recovered after the war, a 17-year-old called Yasuo Tanaka wrote simply, "Please forgive me for dying before you." He was 16 when he took off in an Oka rocket plane, too young to vote, old enough to die with precision. Kazuo Odachi, one of the few who lived to tell the tale, recalled flying 8 suicide sorties that never reached their targets. "We were cajoled into volunteering," he said decades later. "None of us had the audacity to refuse. The word volunteer was a trap. We were boys dressed up as heroes." When Japan's surrender order reached his airfield on August 15, 1945, he was already seated in the cockpit, engines screaming for the last mission. A jeep raced down the strip, waving a cloth. Abort. The war is over. He throttled down and cried, not from relief but confusion. "We did not know who we were without death," he later wrote. By that summer, 4,600 kamikaze pilots had perished. Some struck ships, many were shot down or consumed by cloud and fuel. The empire that guided them dissolved beneath atomic skies. Out of the ruins emerged men like Odachi, walking home barefoot through bombed cities, haunted by survival. Success meant death, failure meant life. Another survivor, Kaoru Hasegawa, told interviewers in 1995, "I did not know how to live with failure. It took me 50 years to learn." The end came not with a final battle, but a radio broadcast. The Emperor's voice, calm and unfamiliar, announced surrender. Across airfields, the pilots wept, not just for defeat, but because their existence had lost definition. Planes that were meant to immortalize them rusted overnight. The divine wind had blown itself out, and with it Japan's last fragment of myth. The war ended quietly, almost unreal, with a trembling radio broadcast on August 15, 1945. Emperor Hirohito's voice, soft, distant, unfamiliar, reached through the broken radio networks to announce surrender. At airbases across Japan, engines that had idled for final missions were shut down one last time. The Kamikaze, the divine wind, dissolved on the breath of his words. Some pilots were sitting in cockpits, already strapped in, when the message came. Others, disoriented by the sudden absence of purpose, simply removed their hachimaki headbands and placed them on the ground, unsure what to do with their survival. The aftermath was silence. More than 3,800 pilots had died in suicide missions, leaving behind families who were told to honor their sacrifice as sacred. Yet in the ruined cities that followed, that reverence curdled into shame. Surviving pilots, men whose planes had malfunctioned or whose missions had been aborted, came home to a homeland that did not know how to speak to them. Some neighbors whispered that these returnees had been cowards, unworthy of the spiritual perfection the propaganda had promised. Survivors like Kazuo Odachi later described those years as exile without distance. "We were forbidden to talk about what we did," he recalled. "We were told, you failed your country by living." Between 1945 and 1952, even Allied occupation censors forbade public discussions of the Kamikaze, branding them relics of insanity. For decades, the subject slept, sealed away in drawers with unsent letters and burned photographs. But memory has a way of resurfacing through regret. By the 1990s, during interviews and memorials, the aging pilots began to speak, not out of pride, but out of longing to restore nuance to a story stripped of humanity. They described flight not as devotion, but as indoctrination, the seamless union of education and duty that made death feel predetermined. Tatsukuma Ueno, now in his late 90s, still tells audiences how natural it seemed in 1945 to die for one's country, because from childhood he had never been shown another possibility. The Chirin Peace Museum on Kyushu preserves their legacy. Inside, rows of glass cubes display portraits, diaries, and the final poems written before takeoff, so fragile they vibrate with the weight of words unsent. Visitors find delicate handwriting inked in moments before death. "Please live happily. My body will become wind." In another note, scrawled in red pencil, "I am not brave, I am just resolved." For those who read Japanese, the calligraphy is steady, practiced, heartbreakingly formal. By the late 20th century, public sentiment had begun to divide. Some nationalist groups still hailed the Kamikaze as the ultimate patriots. Others insisted they were victims, boys trapped by imperial delusion. Each year at Chiran, old men and women come to bow before walls of faces, unsure whether to mourn or to apologize. Survivors often stand apart, silent, caught between admiration and guilt. "I live for the ones who did not return," Odachi once said, "but some days I still envy them." History's judgment remains conflicted. For historians, the Kamikaze were a tragic synthesis of culture, desperation, and indoctrination, proof that nationalism can sculpt courage from fear and submission from loyalty. For psychologists and theologians, they embody the ultimate paradox. Men who believed self-destruction could preserve life. Modern Japan remembers them with restraint, neither glorifying nor condemning, but acknowledging their innocence within the machinery of war. 80 years later, the story continues to breathe in films, museums, and memorial essays. Generations that never knew hunger or conscription now struggle to imagine a society where youth equaled sacrifice. Yet their faces remain on paper, their words more vivid than flags or medals. They remind a peacetime world of what happens when obedience replaces conscience, when glory is defined by disappearance. As the veterans fade and the voices grow thin, the temples of Chiran ring with quiet bells each spring. And if one listens closely, beyond the prayers and camera shutters, there seems to linger the faint drone of engines, ghosts of aircraft that took off into light too bright to bear. The silence that followed was not peace, only the sound of history turning its page.